Hi, friends. I had a chance last summer to visit the location of the Battle of Antietam, which took place during the American Civil War. And I read a book about the battle, and I became really interested in something that happened on this bridge, which was part of where the battle was fought. I don't think a lot of people know as much about this battle. Gettysburg is kind of the most famous battle of the American Civil War. The Battle of Antietam, actually, September 17th, that's still the single deadliest day in U.S. history. There was almost like 10,000 casualties. And I guess it's really significant because really there was a Union victory, and that immediately led Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, which said that slaves that were liberated by the Union Army would then be forever free. So I visited this location, and I walked across this bridge, and I read a great book called Landscape Turned Red by Stephen W. Sears. That's where I'm getting the information from this video about something really, really cool that happened on this bridge as kind of the climactic moment of the battle. It's named after this guy, Ambrose Burnside, and here's an etching of soldiers crossing the bridge. So I just make this video. I'll try to keep it like 10 minutes. I'm just a middle school history teacher. I'm not a Civil War like historian. So I'm really just taking information from this text and talking a little bit about it. So, briefly, the context: the United States in 1861, the dark blue and light blue states are the states that were the Union, like New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. You have the gray states, which were the Confederacy, the dark gray states. And then you had these light blue states: Maryland, about right here is where the battle was fought, Kentucky, and Missouri. These were Union states, but they were still slaveholding states. And Maryland was one of those states. It did not join the Confederacy, but slavery was still legal there. And in 1861, or actually 1862, the war was going pretty poorly for the Union. They had lost a bunch of battles in and around Virginia, and General Lee had actually taken his soldiers and advanced them into a Union state, which was really, really bad for Lincoln. He feared that if the war continued to go poorly, that states like Missouri, Kentucky, and Delaware might actually join the Union. So just the location of the battle meant that it was pretty pivotal that the Union attempt to turn back this Confederate invasion. Everybody thought the war would be taking place in like the deep South, but in the early stages, it was Lee who had the upper hand, and he had actually advanced into a northern state. And it's important to remember at this point in the Civil War, Lincoln was not, and the Union was not fighting to end slavery. Like when the war started, this quote from the text kind of shows it to us. This is an interview with Horace Greeley. Lincoln says, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all of the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that." So Lincoln becomes this great emancipator, but earlier on, and there's lots of other quotes that back this up. Like, when the war first started, it wasn't about emancipating slaves or freeing slaves. It was just about preserving the Union together. But as we'll see after the Battle of Antietam, that direction changed. And it was kind of significant because, interestingly enough, when the Confederacy becomes a country, immediately the Union introduces this great blockade known as the Anaconda Plan, which basically ships were positioned all where this black line is like a snake. It was a blockade that stopped Southern exports from leaving and going to Europe. So this didn't happen. So the South is, of course, the great center for cotton, and cotton is no longer being delivered to France and England. And this is actually kind of significant for a moment because the countries in Europe, like France and England, for a while considered joining or recognizing the Confederacy as a country and then maybe helping them to secure their independence. There's a quote in the text that says Napoleon III asked his foreign minister to inquire whether the English government if it does not believe that the moment has arrived when the South should be recognized. Because again, Europe was missing out on its cotton. It wanted its cotton to feed its textile mills in Great Britain. From the text, it says 80,000 textile workers went unemployed and 370,000 workers were employed part time, and the people were upset. So the government is saying, well, should we recognize the Confederacy? Um, Lincoln decides immediately after the battle, I'm going to come back to this slide in just a second, to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. But you had the Battle of Antietam, which again took place in Maryland, in a slaveholding state, and there was this bridge, which again was part of the battlefield layout. Um, if you go if you go and visit, you can see how the battle took place on this like huge territory. So I'm only signaling out a significant spot. But basically, you had the Union on this side, and you had the Confederacy on this side, and they needed to get across this bridge. And the textbook says the Rohrbach Bridge, as it was known, I think it was originally some German farmers in the area, was a triple arch stone that spanned 125 feet and a dozen feet wide, and it was one of the most defensible spots on the battlefield. So this is basically saying this bridge is going to be really hard to cross because the Confederacy can just pour down their fire from here and all these different directions. So it's going to be really, really hard to cross this bridge. The Union needed to do so, and I don't totally know why. Again, I don't understand battle logistics, but basically, the Union, which was on this side over here, needed to get here. And it says from the text that Brigadier General Edward Ferraro chose his two toughest outfits, the 51st Pennsylvania and the 51st New York. And they told him that they needed to cross the bridge, and he gave them like a motivational speech. And then it's kind of cool. There's a brother of Walt Whitman who was there, and this is coming from Walt Whitman's brother, who said, one of the soldiers is like yelled out to Ferraro, like, if we cross that bridge, can we get our whiskey ration back? Apparently they had it like taken away for like rowdy behavior. Again, these are tough dudes. And the brigadier guy said like, yes, of course. And then the men are like, yeah, great. So, like, cross the bridge and we get our whiskey back. And they ran across the bridge and they took that position. And that was very vital for the success of the Battle of Antietam. To emphasize how important it was, again, that the Union soldiers get from here to here and then set up a perimeter or something, is the general of the Union at the time, George McClellan. He says, tell General Burnside, the guy with the great side burns, that this is the battle of the war. He must hold his ground till dark at any cost. They got to cross the bridge and then they had to defend it. I will send him this. And then the courier is starting to go back. And then McClellan says, again, tell him if he cannot hold this ground, then the bridge to the last man, always, always the bridge. If the bridge is lost, all is lost. So again, if they lose this bridge, which they just took, the battle will be over. And the Union will lose. At the end of the day, the Union forces still held on to the bridge. And then the Battle of Antietam was won. And then if we go back here, what happened is the Confederacy army, which was fighting here, had to retreat back to Virginia. It was significant. The Union could kind of breathe for a while now. And then Lincoln says at a cabinet meeting a few days later, Lincoln told his advisors, if God gave us the victory in the approaching battle, the Battle of Antietam, he would consider it an indication of the divine will to proceed with emancipation, meaning he would turn the war from one of just keeping the Union together to making it about emancipating the nearly 11 million slaves that were living in the South. Someone was quoted as saying that Lincoln said, God has decided this question in favor of the slaves. Wallace quoted him as saying, Lincoln then read a draft of the Emancipation Proclamation. And what was it about the battle that made Lincoln say, we're going to make this about emancipation? Well, European statesmen, this is map of Europe, 1862, is they were again not getting their cotton. And most countries in Europe had already outlawed slavery. So the text says Europe's statesmen began to grasp a crucial reality of the situation Abraham Lincoln had recognized almost a year earlier. And we have a quote that says, I cannot imagine that any European power would dare to recognize and aid the Southern Confederacy if it became clear that the Confederacy stands for slavery and the Union stands for freedom, meaning European countries who had again abolished slavery would not recognize the Confederacy if the Confederacy stood for slavery, as it did at that point during the war. So again, that quote, it's not a perfect quote, but it just kind of recognizes that France is willing to forego its cotton. Britain is willing to forego its cotton if the war turned into a war of emancipation. And the war became about emancipation immediately after the Battle of Antietam. So here again was this bridge. I actually walked across it, thought about the soldiers, and drank a little whiskey. But if you're an educator or you're just interested in this topic, um, soldiers who ran across this bridge who were shouting, yelling, cursing, and dying, and then they got their whiskey afterwards, their actions helped ensure a victory at Antietam, which led to emancipation, which led to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and really led us on this crusade kind of for civil rights. And the coolest thing about this story is this sycamore tree was there in 1862. It's like 170 some years old now, too. So, if you're an educator or you're just interested, like some lesson plans, like build a bridge connecting different objects, items, or ideas. Here you have soldiers rushing across a bridge, and here you have them defending a bridge, which led to a victory. You could tell the story from the perspective of the soldiers. My favorite one, if you have, especially like middle schoolers, did a really good job with this, but you can tell the story from the perspective of the tree, right? Like then and now, right? If this bridge, hopefully, I'm kind of making a point, stands for this moment of action and civil rights, and this tree saw it 100 and some years ago. What would the tree say now? And then, I always play this game in history. Consider what might have happened had the bridge not been taken. What if the dude didn't yell out for the whiskey and the bridge fell or wasn't taken and the Union didn't win? What might happen? So just a couple of all things to kind of consider from the Battle of Antietam. I hope I didn't go over 10 minutes. I probably did, but thanks for watching.